Good morning and welcome to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing here on Friday the 15th of March, Gold Cup Day. In fact, how Sunderland could do with a couple of winners over there between now and the end of the season, and I promise that is the last of my horse race and pun jokes. I'm joined today by We Are Sunderland columnist and very respected journalist covering Sunderland for over 25 years, Mr. James Hunter. How are you doing, James?
Morning, Joe. How are you doing? Yes, all grand, thank you. Loving a bit of the horse racing knowledge there. Lovely.
Yeah, something that you're interested in?
I've been to the races a few times. I must say I don't follow it that much, but yeah, it's a good afternoon out, isn't it?
No, it certainly is that, but obviously we're here to talk about Sunderland. Just before I do get going, just want to, as usual, give a shout out to our partners at the Sunderland's Fans Museum and Cospex Opticians, and also just want to give you a shout out and remind you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I think we're about 20 away from 500 now. That would be really nice to sort of reach that target heading into the national break if we could. If you like what we're doing, there's been plenty of positive feedback, which we appreciate. Really enjoy taking the time out to watch and interact with us while we do these videos. As we enjoy bringing you the content, and we will continue to do so. James, it's been another long week for Sunderland, hasn't it? Off the back of a 4-2 defeat down at Southampton. I guess if we quickly go back to recap that, what were your thoughts on Sunderland's display down there? Now 6 defeats in a row.
Yeah, it never rains but it pours, does it? It's particularly grim time, isn't it, for Sunderland? I can't believe just how quickly things have turned around and gone from a mood of relative positivity just before Christmas, beginning of December time, to where we are now, where it looks like Sunderland are stranded in mid-table and are going to be competing to try and finish in the top half rather than the top 6. It's changed around a lot. These 6 defeats have been incredibly damaging, particularly the very beginning of the run. The defeats that were suffered under Michael Beale before he left. But this losing streak has continued under Mike Dodds too. Latest defeat down at Southampton last weekend. I thought Sunderland were pretty poor. They did well to get back in the game after falling 2-0 down, to come back to 2-2. But ultimately, you always felt, or I always felt, that Southampton could step it up a gear again. And of course, when it got back to 2-2, that's exactly what they did, and went on to win the game 4-2. So yes, that's really ramped up the pressure on tomorrow's game against QPR.
Yeah, it feels as though certainly the last 2 games in isolation with Leicester and Southampton, that it has felt that, hasn't it, where both Leicester and Southampton, if they probably needed to, could have stepped on it a bit more. I mean, we saw the first 20 minutes or so against Leicester, how impressive they were. And I think the first half, Southampton were very similar, although I do think Sunderland were especially poor in that first half. And that's it, isn't it? I mean, we've spoke about consistency all season across the board, but they can only seem to knit it together in patches of games at the moment. And as we all know, the Championship is a ruthless league. That's not going to win you enough points, is it?
No. And if you're in that situation where you can only put together good patches in games, good spells in games, then you at least have to ruthlessly exploit those good patches. And if you don't have a striker worthy of the name, then you can't do that. It's not if you play well for half an hour in a 90-minute game, but you score 2 or maybe 3 goals in that period, well, you've got a chance of winning. But if you play well for 30 minutes but you don't score, then your chances are that you're not going to be able to capitalise on that. So I think Sunderland's problems, they run deep, but certainly a lot of them stem from the poor recruitment over the last 2 windows, and ultimately that failure to bring in a top striker or a striker of Championship quality to replace Ross Stewart when he left last summer. So I think Sunderland are still paying the price for that, basically.
And I think that what's particularly worrying in this run of form is that if you look at the 6 games, you wouldn't necessarily say that they deserve more than what they've got, really, would you?
No. I haven't looked at any of those games and thought, Sunderland should have won that. They were hard done by today. They could and should have won, but there was a lucky goal, a fortunate goal, a bad deflection, a bit of luck. Something went in favour of the opposition. It hasn't felt like that at all. Sunderland have been well beaten in most of those games. And I think that as I was saying about how the mood has changed, so Sunderland's performances have changed. They've regressed massively from beginning of December, which is a sort of the reference point I'm using for when Tony Mowbray left, and the season started to go downhill rapidly from there. I mean, Tony Mowbray had reached some choppy waters as well at that stage, but it still felt a world away from now. It's a very, very tough situation that Sunderland find themselves in, and I think that you can probably look at the last 3 games against Leicester and Norwich and Southampton and say, well, they're tough fixtures, they're difficult games. So they're 3 games under Michael Beale. The previous one, of course, his first game in charge was Swansea, which looked a winnable fixture, and yet Swansea were by far the better team, certainly for the first 45 minutes. But you're now looking at QPR tomorrow, and then down to Cardiff on Good Friday, and then at home against Blackburn on Easter Monday. And you're looking at those 3 games, and you're thinking, these are games that Sunderland have to win if they're going to have any chance of perking up in the last couple of months of the season.
Yeah, we'll come to the QPR game shortly. I just want to quickly sort of round up the 6 defeats in a row. I mean, it's the first time they've lost 6 games in the league, I think, going back to 2013, the beginning of that season. Obviously, in the Premier League, Manchester United and Liverpool were in that run as well. I think you've touched on it in your column today, We Are Sunderland. If you haven't read that, everyone go subscribe and have a read of that. But not been done in the Championship or in Division 2 since going back to sort of 1993. It's, I said it last week, we're entering in a piece that we're entering uncharted waters. We really are, aren't we? If Sunderland were to go and lose tomorrow, it's unprecedented what this team have done.
Yeah, so just to recap on that, Sunderland have only lost 6 successive league games outside the top flight on 2 previous occasions, most recently in 93-94 in the Terry Butcher, Mick Buxton days. And prior to that, you've got to look back to 1959-60. So they're the only other 2 previous occasions. So to lose a 7th is unheard of outside the top flight, of course. Top flight, different matter. But outside the top flight, it would be a new low for the club. So the stakes are high, and okay, you look at this game against QPR tomorrow, and you could say, well, if Sunderland at least get a draw, then the losing sequence is broken. But that's not good enough, and that won't save the powers that be and Mike Dodds from the intense scrutiny that always comes when you go into an international break on a bad run. So they desperately need a victory this weekend, because times have been so grim in the last, I don't know what the period these 6 games have been in, 6 weeks or so. It has been very, very poor, and it's really Sunderland have sabotaged their season. That's what it feels to me, in terms of the managerial changes, in terms of the bad recruitment. For any number of reasons, they've really shot themselves in the foot, and you can't reconcile the situation now with the positivity that surrounded Sunderland last summer, having just come out of the Championship, finished in the top 6 in their first season back coming out of League One into the Championship, finishing in the top 6 and going into the playoffs. At that point, everything looked good, and it was a case of building on that, recruiting well in the summer, and taking things further. And Sunderland have gone backwards hugely. The strange thing, of course, is last season was, if you like, Sunderland exceeding all expectations. Had Sunderland had this season, last season, and then last season, this season, we'd be looking at this a very different way. But that's no consolation. So Sunderland fans expect to see improvement, and to be fair, they've got every right to do so. Christian Speakman always talks about constant progression and constant improvement. So it's not unfair or unreasonable to expect progress, even incremental progress. But this is major regression.
On that then, do you think, particularly with this run, and I'll look at the last 2 games, Leicester and Southampton, as an example of this, that it possibly, I don't want to say it shows up the model, but it shows how they are probably going to have to bend it a little bit if they're going to reach the heights of those 2 teams. Now, I know it's a little bit unfair because of the parachute payments that those 2 teams get, and throw Leeds into that mix as well. But we spoke about earlier that the quality between the 2 teams at times in the game, and how they could just probably put the foot on the gas a little bit more. Sunderland are quite away from getting that by going down this route, aren't they?
They are, yes. That there is, of course, a huge disparity in Sunderland coming out of League One the season before last, and those teams coming out of the Premier League. So you're talking about a huge disparity. You've got to Sunderland have to try and do all they can to try and bridge that. Lots of other clubs are doing the same. There's a handful of clubs, half a dozen clubs, that are spending beyond their means. They're taking a gamble, taking a punt, and if it doesn't work for them, then they're going to find themselves in a lot of trouble. Sunderland have chosen not to do that. Sunderland are trying to, live within their means and build slowly, and that's frustrating for fans who want to see faster progress than that. But I can at least see the financial sense in doing it. But still, football's about what you see on the pitch. Fans are less concerned about budgets and constraints and living within your means, as long as it doesn't imperil the football club and cause you to have a fire sale of players. Ultimately, fans aren't particularly bothered about the club having a healthy bank balance. It doesn't mean anything to Sunderland fans if somebody, if the accounts are released and it says, "Oh, Sunderland have got X amount of £1 million in the bank," they want to see that money spent on players on the pitch. As far as the model's concerned, I've consistently, right from the start, said that the model has to be flexible. The phrase that I've used it several times, is that it's got to be. It's a model. It's not a straitjacket. But it has increasingly felt like a straitjacket. All the experienced players that the club had, or virtually all of the experienced players that the club had, were jettisoned over the summer, and even into January, with Alex Pritchard leaving, and it's left Sunderland with a very, very young side. And I remember Tony Mowbray saying at the beginning of the season that there are times in the season when the going gets tough, and that's when you need those experienced players to help guide the younger ones through. This sequence of 6 games is exactly the spell that he was alluding to. This kind of spell. Yet Sunderland don't have the players required to help guide them through. They're relying on Luke O'Nien, who is suspended at the moment, and you're looking in that team, and you're looking for leaders, and there aren't many around. It's quite tough to see, and it's no surprise that you've got people like Tony Mowbray last summer, and even Michael Beale before Christmas. They were both talking about needing more experience in the squad. Tony Mowbray came out right and said experience. Michael Beale's phrase was need more grey hair. Amounts to the same thing. Yet their pleas have been largely ignored, and to some degree you could argue that it was one of the major factors in Mowbray's sacking, the fact that he did speak out ahead of the January transfer window and lay it on the line about exactly what the club needed. But the powers that be knew best, and we are where we are.
Even Alex Neil this week, he's just come out and done a podcast with the EFL debate, and he's sort of said very similar. Really talented young group of players, but you just need lots of experience. I think it's a common theme, isn't it? And at the moment, this squad has been tested more than what it probably has been ever, given their age and in this run of form that they're in. And that brings me to the next point. I mean, we're going to speak to Mike Dodds later this afternoon for his press conference ahead of tomorrow. He's said often that he doesn't necessarily want to use excuses and things, but at the same time, he has referenced that he's been dealt an unfair hand. And you can justify a little bit of that. The injuries and things at the moment, particularly defensively, really hard to deal with. Luke O'Nien, you mentioned him there, suspended. Dan Ballard looks as though he could be out, although he has been called up with the international squad. Jensen Seal out for the season, as we found out earlier this week. Centre back is a real problem, and that's before we move further up the pitch.
Yeah. So I saw Mike's comments there. I think breaking news: life isn't fair. I don't agree that it's an unfair hand. It's a tough hand. It's certainly a tough hand. There's no doubt about that. But fairness doesn't really come into it. Injuries are part and parcel of the game. They happen. Invariably, it just seems to be Murphy's law that you get one injury in a position and then it's another one in the same one, and so on and so forth. And Sunderland are certainly suffering from that right now. But this is not a bolt from the blue. Sunderland aren't the first or the only team to be dealing in this kind of situation. Yeah. This is why you need decent squad depth. And if you don't have the squad depth to cope with these injuries in certain positions, certain key positions, partly it's down to bad luck, but partly it's down to poor recruitment again. Why weren't more? Nectar Triantis has been allowed to go out to Hibs on loan. Had he been here, he would no doubt be in the side, or certainly in the squad, but probably in the side this weekend. And these are decisions that are taken by people, and they have to be accountable for them. It's no good turning around and saying, "Oh, isn't it all unfair? Isn't it? Aren't we so unlucky?" It's a decision taken, and somebody has to put their hand up and say, "Sorry, I made a mistake here."
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to bring up an image here of a potential sort of outfield side who are injured at the moment. I mean, you can throw Luke O'Nien into that as well. Obviously, he's suspended. He'll be back after the international break, but Sealed out for the season. Elise, he's played 3 games this season. Serkin has played 8 games this season. Huggins, he's had a good season, but looking at his stats since he joined nearly 3 years ago, he's played less than 30 games for Sunderland. Now, I know it was really harsh what happened to him this year because he was having a good season. Elliot Embleton hasn't featured since 2022 for Sunderland. Obviously went on loan last year, but has had difficulties with injuries. Evans hasn't featured since the Middlesbrough game last season in January. Jack Clark, we know obviously how significant a miss he is. Patrick Roberts has struggled a little bit this year. Bradley Dack, just 12 appearances this summer. Goes back to kind of what you said there in terms of recruitment, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, Sunderland have got this model. They're very wedded to this model. And it has its definite advantages. You look at some of the players that Sunderland have brought in, and I'm thinking about the likes of Jack Clark and Dan Ballard and such have you, and they're excellent players, quality players that Sunderland fans want to see. On the pitch, they play exciting football. They're brilliant talents. But we've got some wild cards, haven't you? There are some that are out on loan. I mean, Jewison Bennett is out on loan, another wild card. He's coming up to having been here 2 years, and is he any better today than he was the day he arrived? I don't know. I don't think so. So yeah, there are lots of recruitment failings, aren't there, over this? Well, certainly in the last 2 windows, the 4 strikers that came in. To my mind, only Nazari Rusin has looked anything like. The rest have been very, very poor. Fine, okay. You might say that Hamir and you might say that Mayenda are young lads and they've got a lot of potential and they might well come good next year or the year after. Great. That doesn't help you right now, though. If that is the plan, if that was the thinking that you bring these players in and the ones for the future, well, in that case, that left you with only 2 strikers, then, didn't it? This season that left you only with Mason Burstow and Rusin. If the other 2 you're saying, well, they're for further down the line, Mason Burstow's move hasn't worked out for him, hasn't worked out for Sunderland, hasn't worked out for Chelsea, so he's made a negligible contribution, really. So yeah, it does. It all comes down to recruitment, and that is what's held Sunderland back this season, and that's what's torpedoed things. But yeah, I mean, I see your graphic. They have got a lot of players out. There are players there that, were they fully fit, would probably be, would definitely be. I'm looking here at the graphics, or Ballard and Clark and Roberts. If fit, would certainly be in the starting lineup. Probably circling 2. You could argue. Evans. Well, he'd certainly have a part to play, but these guys are not available, and you can see how thin Sunderland's squad is stretched when you take out key players.
Absolutely. I mean, fair point in terms of saying 5 or 6 of them could possibly go in. Just want to go back to the striker situation there. I mean, that has been a topic all season, and it will be for the final 8 or 9 games as well. Were you surprised that Mason Burstow went back in against Southampton? And what do you expect tomorrow? Or is it because it almost feels scattergun, doesn't it? As though just spin the wheel almost and pick one of them.
It does. Unless you're playing Nazri Rusin, who, as I say, is the one who has looked the most likely. And it's no coincidence, by the way, that he is also the most experienced of those players that came in. He's the oldest and most experienced, and he's the one that's looked most likely. Join the dots. But he has looked the one most likely. Of the others, I mean, obviously Mayenda is away on loan, but of the other 2, pay your money, take your choice. Really, I mean, neither Hamir nor Burstow have looked anything like it. Of those 2, if you force me into it, of those 2, then Burstow is marginally better than Hamir. But we're talking about, we're talking about the least worst option, and Sunderland shouldn't be in a situation of trying to pick out what the least worst option. I mean, to my mind, given the personnel available, I'd be inclined to looking at playing Jobe Bellingham up front. But there again, I say that, I'm just, I also think Jobe Bellingham needs a break, needs a rest. Again, he scored a great goal down at Southampton last weekend, but he also, was culpable for Southampton's opener. So he's looked for a long time like he's in need of a rest, and I think that it's getting to the point where he is now getting quite a lot of criticism, probably more criticism than he deserves, because his performances are suffering due to fatigue, and that's only to be expected, only natural. If you remember Dan Neil in his breakthrough season, when he was at a similar kind of stage to Jobe Bellingham, he reached a point where his performances fell off. Every manager tells you, young players, young teenage players, they can do so many games in a row, but it does hit them, and it looks like it's hit Jobe Bellingham. The problem that Sunderland have got, well, twofold, is first of all, he's become a key part of the team, and second, he is the only success of the club's recruitment over the season. So to take him out would really highlight just how poor the last 2 transfer windows have been. It would really bring that into stark focus, wouldn't it, if the one player who's established himself in the team is no longer in the team, albeit for a good reason.
Yeah, I mean, Jobe was one of the. We spoke about this on Monday's pod, myself and Dom, about him. He came out and apologised, didn't he, for what happened at the weekend. That in itself, it almost feels a little bit wrong to me that a young lad, 18-year-old, in his first full season, it feels as though he needs to come out and do that, because he shouldn't really. He's probably there's been more expectations put on him than what he should have this season coming into the squad.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, he shouldn't be in that situation, but fair play to Jobe, and he deserves great credit for at least accepting accountability. It's very easy, and lots of players over the years hide when things go poorly. The number of times looking back over my time covering Sunderland on a day-by-day basis, if a player scores an own goal, if a player makes a huge mistake, a howler, whatever it might be, we would ask to speak to that player, and we would be told no, they don't want to do anything, they don't want to say anything. Was that because the player didn't really want to say anything, or was it the club acting, it would see, to protect them? I don't know, but it does no harm for fans to see a player hold his hands up and apologise and take some responsibility, and that is that's character building, character forming in its own way. Obviously, you don't want to be the person wheeled out week after week, apologising for bad performances and mistakes. I mean, there have been a fair few players that have found themselves trapped in that cycle over the years as well. But I was pleased to see Jobe Bellingham acknowledge what we could all see was a major mistake. But yes, it felt like he probably, he probably couldn't say it, but there are probably, fatigue played a major part in that part, in that mistake that he made down there at Southampton.
We'll move it into this weekend then with Queen's Park Rangers. Now, there's two trains of thought here. You'd look at this at, Sunderland v QPR at home. QPR only a point above the bottom three. Normally, that wouldn't necessarily translate itself to being a difficult fixture, but QPR, I think they've only lost 2 of the last 10 games. They're 8th in the form table over those 10 games. This is very much a banana skin with everything's going on for Sunderland at the moment, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It'd be very easy to look at this and say, well, the last 3 games have been tough against teams in the top 6, but QPR are struggling just above the relegation zone. So, it's at home. That's okay then. Nah, it doesn't work like that. QPR are definitely, improving. They are giving themselves a good chance of avoiding relegation. They are very much in the relegation fight. They are fully motivated with something to fight for. The question is, after 6 successive defeats, what will Sunderland's attitude be towards the game? Will Sunderland look above them and think, well, we can't get to the top 6 anymore? We're stuck in mid-table. Again, this is dangerous because you can soon get sucked down into the battle at the wrong end of the table. So it's all about how Sunderland approach the game. I think if Sunderland approach the game like the top 6 is still within reach, even though personally, realistically, I don't think it is. But if they approach it like they have to play every game as though they can reach that top 6, then that's fine. But anything less than that, any sense of complacency whatsoever, and a team like QPR, who have got players like Ilias Chair that can conjure something out of nothing, if you like a little bit of an Ahmad type, then Sunderland could easily be embarrassed. And I think that given the 6 defeats, given what we said about the possibility of a 7th defeat and what that would mean, given that it's at home, given that there's a fortnight's international break, which people will be chewing over a bad result if that's how it turns out. Very, very dangerous waters.
Absolutely. I mean, comment coming there for Jim Stevens. We will get beat tomorrow. Club is in free fall. Another one from Michael Trainer. Model is taking us Division 1 either this year or next season. Another one here. How long can it go on for? This is Chris. Without leader and manager, went to part for the cup draw. You can sense the frustration amongst the fan base, can't you? And if they don't get a result tomorrow, I mean, if QPR were to come up here and win tomorrow, the gap would then only be 5 points between them and Queen's Park Rangers. Things, this season isn't as much as though it's drifted from the playoffs. It could very much come to life at the wrong end of the table if things don't sort themselves out.
Yeah, it's tight. It's a tight table. There's not much in it. I mean, Sunderland are 11 points off the top 6 and 9 points off the bottom 3. I think I said last week in the column, my belief is that Sunderland won't get relegated. I know people were worried about that because, as one of the commenters was saying there, the club's in free fall. I don't think the club will get relegated. It could, however, find itself, in that relegation battle, on the fringes of that relegation battle, and with a nervous ending to the season and looking over its shoulder. That could definitely happen. And that would be, a huge disappointment given how positive things seemed, not very long ago, or just prior to this, 6 game losing streak. Right up to that point, some of them were on the cusp of the playoffs and were looking at the top 6. Now they're looking over their shoulders towards the bottom 3 and trying to stay clear of that. It's the mood has changed dramatically. There will be a feeling of panic within the hierarchy at Sunderland. They won't want to let that show. They'll deny that that's the case. But that they can see the table the same that we can, and they also know that unlike you and I and fans, they're on the hook for their decisions. And come the end of the season, when an inquest is held and everybody looks back and sees exactly what went wrong, there are going to be some very tough questions for them to answer, and it will be interesting to see, where the buck stops, because it's fascinating. Success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. When things were going well last season, people basked in the glow and took credit for the recruitment, and were eager to shoehorn in and highlight the part that they played in the 6th place finish, and up there with the players and with Tony Mowbray. But if Sunderland find themselves this season, too close for comfort to the relegation zone, it'll be interesting to see who holds their hands up and says, yeah, this is, partly at least down to me, or who, walks away and goes, nothing to do with me. There's nothing to do with me. We sacked 2 head coaches because they were failing. Yeah, right, okay. So the whole head coach is responsible when things go wrong, but not so much when things go right.
Yeah, I mean, you said there, nail on the head, really, in terms of the mood changing. I mean, just look, since in these months since, there's been a couple of protests in terms of banners going out, crowds dwindling a little bit. You just get this. I mean, tomorrow again, if you're looking at that, if QPR were to go 1-0 up, the atmosphere inside that ground, it's going to be nervy. There's going to be tension there. It could be a little bit hostile. It almost feels as though they need to get to the international break, regardless of what happens tomorrow, and just totally regroup. And that's something else that you've touched on in your column, isn't it? This next 2-week period after tomorrow, hopefully, like you say, get a result to end this run, but then just completely reset and then take on this last couple of weeks of the season and try and give something to go into next year and into the summer.
Yeah, well, of course, there are some positives to look forward to, or at least we hope there are. And Luke O'Nien being available again after the international break, hopefully Dan Ballard returning. I think Mike Dodds has said that he's hopeful that Jack Clark would be fit, sometime soon after the end of the international break. You can't overstate just how important these players are to Sunderland, as they would be to any team. Any team in the Championship that loses their best players are going to struggle. But yeah, so that there are positive signs on the horizon, but you've got to get there first. And the question is how much damage is done in the meantime. 7th defeat tomorrow. What's that going to mean? I know Mike Dodds has been put in charge till the end of the season, but realistically, just as a poser, and I have nothing against Mike at all, and I'm certainly not saying that he shouldn't see out his tenure till the end of the season. But how many defeats would it take, do you think, Joe, before the pressure on the powers that be at the club, the pressure switches to them, and they think, well, we've got to do something, and the only lever we can pull is to have a change of head coach, because that's the only thing we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. You're taking the words out of my mouth there in terms of what I was going to ask you.
So if you're 4 defeats, all right, it's a 6 defeat losing streak, but 4 of those defeats have come under Mike Dodds. If tomorrow became 5 under him, if there was then another 1, another 2 after the international break, and suddenly you're down at, he personally had lost 7, let's just say, or even 6 defeats and a draw. At what point do they think, well, we've got to be seen to doing something? We can't be seen to be sitting on our hands and just letting it get as bad as it can be. And say, well, Mike's here till the end of the season. At what point are they forced to do something just to say, yes, we acknowledge there's a problem here and we've got to be seen to doing something? And would that make a difference?
It's absolutely a valid point. I mean, again, if you were to lose tomorrow, then you come back after the international break. I think you go to Cardiff, which is tricky as it is anyway. They turned over Ipswich last week. Then you've got what will be a huge game then against Blackburn, I think, on Easter Monday before you go to Leeds. If you get to that Leeds game, that gap, that 9-point gap, if you're not going to win any of these games, will shrink. And I think you're absolutely right. If it got to the stage where you're heading into the sort of final 5 or 6 games if that gap's down to maybe 5 points, that is a serious decision that the hierarchy would have to make, because you are then, as to go back to the comment earlier in the show there, the club, you would accept that the club would be in free fall at that point if you hadn't won for what would be 10 games or so. So that is certainly a point to monitor over the course of the next couple of weeks, particularly if tomorrow doesn't go the way that they wanted to.
Yeah, and do you then, at that point, if you reach that stage, I mean, of course, we're speculating here and we're throwing things forward and we're painting a pretty grim scenario. I appreciate that, but hey, if nobody within the Academy of Light is mapping out a worst case scenario, then they're not doing their jobs properly either, because it could happen. Let's hope it doesn't, but it could happen. So they need to have some sort of contingency in place. But do you then say, well, there's 5 games to go, we need to find some established firefighter? I say this because, to go on beautiful symmetry, we return to where you started the briefing here, with Cheltenham. I saw pictures of Sam Allardyce down at Cheltenham this week. And you think, do you think, do we need to, bring in, if not Sam Allardyce, but a figure like Sam Allardyce, an experienced, coach who can rally things for the final 5 games to steer Sunderland into calmer waters and away from the relegation zone, just on a temporary basis. That becomes another decision that the top brass have to decide. And what would that say about their model and their belief in young and emerging coaches? The trouble is that they paint themselves into corners because they have a model with young players. They don't want experience. They want young and up and coming coaches. They paint themselves into a corner, and sometimes they need to be a little bit less definitive about how they speak. Although, look, I appreciate, and I've done your job and whatnot, and when they give wishy-washy answers, as a journalist, you want to pin them down. So it's no good, when they talk about the model, if they're wishy-washy, then you say, well, what exactly do you mean? So yeah, we are slightly responsible here, but yeah, it's up to them to come out with a form of words that they can live with and that gives them some wiggle room. But yeah, the model might have to adapt to the situation rather than hope that the situation adapts to the model.
Incredible that we're talking about this, really, isn't it? How did we get here? We'll leave it there this morning, James. I've thoroughly enjoyed that, and thank you very much for coming on. I'll give a quick shout out to our partners once again, Michael and team down at the Fans Museum and Cost-Specs Opticians in Durham. If you haven't read James's latest column at We Are Sunderland, make sure you do that. Head over to our website, wearesunderland.com, subscribe for as little as £1, and then I think it's $2.99 thereafter. Loads of content going on, columnists like James every week, tactical insight, exclusive interviews. I think there's a lot of good stuff going on there over the last week or so. So make sure you get involved with that. Also, like and subscribe our channels, particularly YouTube channel, so we can continue bringing you more videos like this. And James, thank you once again for joining us for this show.
Thanks, Joe. That's great. And fingers crossed that we see an end to this losing streak tomorrow.
Fingers crossed.